It's AirTalk on LAist 89.3. I'm Larry Mantle. We're doing interviews with all 12 of the candidates, should they agree to come in and spend approximately 15 minutes with us talking about their candidacy. George Gascon, the incumbent, will be with us later this week. We've heard from, I'm guessing probably around 8 of the candidates to this point. Joining us today is Nathan Hochman, who's a former federal prosecutor, is a criminal law attorney, former president of the LA Ethics Commission, and he was the Republican nominee in the race for state attorney general in the last election. Mr. Hochman, good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me on.
So, Nathan, let's start with what made you decide to run for this. You ran as a Republican. This is a nonpartisan office, of course. You ran as a Republican for state attorney general. We haven't had a Republican statewide office holder in many years now. What made you decide to run in a pretty liberal county like Los Angeles for the DA's job?
Certainly. So I'm running for the DA position as an independent, a registered independent, because I believe a DA needs to be fiercely independent. I think when a DA enacts effectively a political agenda or party affiliation in making the decisions over people's liberty, instead of just relying on the evidence and the law, that's when a DA is not doing their job, that they're not actually upholding the law. I was actually an independent Democrat for 20 years, an independent Republican for 20 years, and have re-registered in this nonpartisan position because I want the voters to understand that I truly believe, and it starts with me, that I will be an independent DA moving politics from the decisions, unlike the way George Gascon has proceeded.
You used term, and I don't want to take a lot of time, but you said you were an independent Democrat. What does that mean? And an independent Republican. What do you mean by that?
That I basically, when I was voting, I voted for the person over the party. That I basically looked to see which was the most qualified candidate, not necessarily which party they were part of. When I was a Democrat, when I was a Republican, I ran as a moderate Republican, as I'm sure you're aware, someone who's actually been pro-choice their whole life, didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016 or 20. All this is public that I revealed during the last campaign, but will enforce the law. What George Gascon has done is he decided to enact blanket pro-criminal policies where he says up front to the criminals that there are certain crimes and certain criminals I will not prosecute. Yet he takes an oath and swears to uphold all the laws, not just the laws he likes. If I take that oath, I will uphold all the laws.
Well, where does prosecutorial discretion come in then? Because certainly with the wide range and volume of cases that a DA's office gets, they're going to make decisions to prosecute in some cases, not in others. And there is that discretion, even though laws are on the books. So in what way do you see him not exercising discretion in a way that upholds the law?
Certainly. And I've been a prosecutor. I've been basically a prosecutor and a U.S. Assistant Attorney General for 10 years and on the defense side for 20 years. George Gascon, as you know, has never actually personally prosecuted a case or defended a case. What he did when he came into office is he issued blanket policies. And by blanket, it means you have absolutely no discretion. So he told the 900 prosecutors that he now is in charge of that they have absolutely no discretion in 9 different areas of prosecution. So in other words, he's removed individualized analysis, which I will bring back to the decision-making in everything dealing with juvenile crimes, dealing with enhancements for guns, dealing with prosecutors attending parole hearings with victims. He's enacted blanket policies, which I view on both sides of the extreme, both the blanket policies of mass incarceration and now Gascon's blanket policies of de-incarceration as the wrong path.
We're talking with Nathan Hochman, candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney. You have experience in the U.S. Attorney's Office, the central region, which includes Los Angeles, a federal prosecutor. You don't have experience within county DA's office. A number of the candidates have that experience. So what would you say to those who might say, well, Gascon was an outsider being in law enforcement, San Francisco DA, but not the LA County, and this is a chance for someone within the office to hold the position?
Certainly. So I'm an outsider in one sense, in the sense that I've never been a state prosecutor, but I've been a federal prosecutor, and I ran a litigating division of the U.S. Department of Justice with a presidential appointment and unanimous Senate confirmation. But I have been involved in the state criminal process for over 20 years on the defense side and understand the mechanisms in the state criminal process as well as anyone. But I have the leadership experience and the independence that I can bring to that office, coupled with 34 years of criminal justice experience that no other candidate can bring.
What is that leadership experience?
So it's both in the public and the private realms. On the public side, I led the U.S. Department of Justice's tax division, a $100 million budget dealing with Congress, the U.S. attorney's offices, the U.S. Department of Justice, and being in charge of 350 lawyers litigating cases around the entire nation. On the private side, I was the head of two major international law firms' government investigations practices and was the president of the LA City Ethics Commission. I'm also the co-founder of the LA Sheriff's Foundation. So I've demonstrated proven leadership skills in a way no other candidate can even touch on both the public and the private realms.
Nathan Hochman joining us, candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney. You mentioned about enhancements. You would prosecute gun enhancements in the commission of crimes. There are also gang enhancements. There are a variety of different ones that have not been consistently prosecuted under the current DA. So what about other enhancements? Would you use gang enhancements rather routinely or selectively or not at all?
Larry, I'll go back to the concept you brought up earlier of individualized analysis. No blanket policies. You look at every case as an individual case. You look at the defendant, the criminal background. You look at the crime committed. You look at the impact on the victim and the evidence that exists. This is what prosecutors used to do until Gascon came into office, and I would bring back. So yes, if there is evidence that shows that a particular gun was used during a robbery, I won't pretend that it didn't exist and won't charge it. Same thing if someone's involved with a gang. The law provides for a gang enhancement. The prosecutors will look at the law, they'll look at the evidence, and make an individualized determination in every single case. This is the way prosecutors used to operate before George Gascon, and I would go back to this traditional way.
Where is the reform in what you're talking about? Because Gascon was elected as a reformer, someone to bring significant change to the office, priorities in what's prosecuted, efforts to end mass incarceration, and to try and address the issue of racial and ethnic differences in prosecution. So in what all the things you're talking about in prosecutions, where are reforms, if at all?
Certainly. Here's where the reforms are, and here's to bring the sensibility of being a defense lawyer for 20 years that no other candidate, including Gascon, has ever been. I am well aware that the government can overreach, whether it's people of color, low-income communities that the government can overreach. I've actually defended it in court personally, and no one other candidate can do this. I would enact the racial blind charging decisions that actually the state of California passed as a law and Gascon has refused so far to enact. I would actually enact that on day one. It actually has to be enacted by January 1st, 2025. It can be enacted before. There's 3 counties in California that have already done it. LA has not done it. I would do it on day one. Also, I would focus on rehabilitation for people who are actually in prison. Gascon has failed the community. He wants these prisoners, these violent and serious criminals, to get out of prison, but he's not given them a skill set while they're in prison so that when they get out, they won't be part of the 50% recidivism rate to find them back in prison within 2 years. One of the programs that I advocate strongly is called the Last Mile. It's the lastmile.org. What it does is it teaches coding skills to prisoners while they're in prison. Gets them a certificate to do websites, for instance, helps them get their first job when they get out of prison. The lastmile.org has a 0% recidivism rate. We need to bring programs like that into the LA County jails to give these prisoners a chance so that when they actually get out of prison, they have a skill set to both be productive citizens, support their families, and not go back.
And that's something the DA's office has the wherewithal to implement in jails?
That's something that the DA's office can work with the LA Sheriff's Department if it's a priority. For George Gascon, he talks the big game, but he doesn't walk the walk. I will actually work with the sheriff's department to bring the rehabilitation skills into the prisons, because I don't want to see these folks commit crimes again. In fact, the entire point of criminal punishment is not to fill the prisons. It's to deter people from committing the crimes in the first place. And if they know that I will fairly and efficiently enforce the lines, and there will be no moving of the lines like George Gascon. I will enforce those lines. The goal is to deter the criminals from committing that crime in the first place.
Nathan Hochman with us, candidate for Los Angeles County District Attorney. Let's talk about Proposition 47, which changed the dollar threshold for theft. $950 under is misdemeanor. There haven't been prosecutions consistently on those. What would you do about misdemeanor offenses and prosecution of property crimes?
So Proposition 47 actually changed two classes of crimes, both drug crimes. It turned certain felony possession crimes into misdemeanors, and did the same with certain theft crimes. Let me speak for a moment about the drug crimes, because it not only turned misdemeanor possession of marijuana into a misdemeanor, but it did the same thing with fentanyl, heroin, ecstasy, methamphetamine. And what we've seen is that it has gutted effectively the drug courts. The drug courts were a very effective option for courts to order someone into a rehabilitation program that if they did it and successfully completed it, they wouldn't go to state prison. When you remove the felony aspect from these highly addictive, dangerous drugs, you've gutted the entire drug court program. I would do my best to see if we could bring something like that back. On the theft crimes, the problem is repeat offenders. Right now, you can steal just under $950 every single day, and they don't aggregate the amounts. I believe that one of the ways we could modify Proposition 47 to deal with repeat offenders is to actually have an aggregation type of statute that the state legislator can actually advocate. There's a bipartisan bill up there now, and I would actually help support that bipartisan bill.
Nathan Hochman with his candidate for LA County District Attorney. Quality of life crimes also are not being prosecuted, disturbing the peace and variety of different things. Often these are associated with people living on the street in psychological distress or addicted to drugs. What would your approach be to those offenses?
Well, again, as you well know, over 70% of our homeless population either suffers from a serious mental illness, substance abuse disorder, or both. You have to basically deal with the root causes of these problems to deal with the quality of life crimes. On the criminal enforcement level, I'm not going to turn my head away and pretend these people didn't commit crimes. If they did commit crimes, they will be prosecuted for the crimes committed. But I'll also work to empower the care courts. These are the new courts that have been set up by Gavin Newsom, which are dedicated to dealing with people with serious mental illness and giving them a residential program to hopefully get the treatment that they need. They don't actually have that for substance abuse, drug addiction programs. There's a pilot project going on right now in Yolo County to deal with the same type of residential placement. I would seek to bring that pilot project to LA County. George Gascon could have done this. He has failed to do this, and he's condemned people with drug addictions to basically live on the streets, to steal to feed the addiction, and to keep remaining to keep harming our community.
I think the concern is, though, with prosecuting the so-called quality of life crimes, you're going to end up with people who've been living on the streets, living in jails, and that essentially becomes their new address instead of on the street.
Right now, the largest homeless shelter in Los Angeles County are our jails. That's already a fact. The care court idea was to actually order them into residential treatment that will actually provide a bed, and now they're providing funding for it. And it's online now in 2024, and hopefully they will build on that program so that judges will actually have a third option other than ordering them back to the streets, which is incredibly inhumane, or putting them in jail, which does nothing for their mental illness. Now they'll have that third option.
We're real tight on time, but I do want to get your reaction to, under Gascon's leadership of this office, many more law enforcement officers have been prosecuted for alleged misconduct, including officer and deputy involved shootings. Your response to how that's been done?
That's been done incredibly poorly. in the sense that Gascon has not, ironically, when reviewing cases to go after police officers, he's not reversed Jackie Lacey and other DA's decisions in the overwhelming majority of cases, though he said he would. Instead, he's appointed a chief of staff, Tiffany Blacknell, who's actually publicly worn a shirt that says the police are trained to kill us. Gascon is sending a message to both the police and to his prosecutors by appointing a woman who actually has never been a prosecutor and has only been a deputy public offender, who's called the police barbarians and an occupying force publicly, that the message is, I am more interested in prosecuting the police than partnering with them. I view it the opposite way. We need to partner with the police to deal with the incredibly difficult criminal issues that our county faces. Obviously, if a police officer crosses the line, they will absolutely be prosecuted, and I'm the only person that has ever prosecuted a police officer, and we will bring back safety to this community.
In closing, 20-second, just closing comment for why you think our listeners should vote for you.
Thank you. Basically, the listeners should be voting for someone who has 34 years of criminal justice experience as a prosecutor, a U.S. Assistant Attorney General, and a defense attorney, president of the LAist City Ethics Commission, someone who has proven leadership experience, and someone who's going to be independent and get politics out of the DA's office. George Gascon has showed us what happens with our safety when that isn't done, and I will bring back common sense safety.
Nathan Hochman, thank you for joining us and talking about your candidacy for LA County District Attorney. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.